Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Small Acreage, Big Impact, Reimagining the Future of African American Land Stewardship. My name is Bethany Wilkinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Forestry and African American Land Retention Network. And I'm thrilled to be hosting you today for this conversation as part of our It's Always Been the Land Black History Month series. So today I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with our newest SFLR site director, Mr. Joseph Johnson from Texas Agroforestry Small Farmers, Ranchers, and Landowners, also called TASFRL. And he and I today are going to be talking about small acreage landowners, the good work that he's doing and leading and partnering with landowners and others to support small acreage land stewards and so much more. So thank you so much for being here. And Joseph, thank you for joining me for today's conversation.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm honored to be here. As I mentioned, if I seem a bit jet lagged, bear with me here. I just got back from a trip to Barcelona, where I participated in a international group structuring the modeling around the flood deployment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with us. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit more about who you are and about the work of TASFRL?
So it's enough for actually, so who am I? I'm what's I guess defined as a beginning farmer and rancher. Someone who's been in the environment for under 10 years. And we are based here in East Texas. TASFRL actually is an organization that focuses on providing support in what is historically referred to as underserved communities, small acreage landowners, those folks that were, in some cases, historically disadvantaged in space.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about when we say small acreage, what does that look like in Texas? Just across the Southeast where SFLR works, we're dealing with slightly different contexts depending on the state. And so I'm curious, what does small acreage mean in Texas forestry?
But if you look at the data as it relates to land ownership in the state of Texas, and this is really not too much different than the rest of the states. However, within Texas, the average land ownership, for instance, for Black operated farms, is approximately 118 acres per average. Where if you look at Hispanic oriented farms, you're looking at approximately 350, 360 acres per average. Whereas on white oriented farms, you're looking at approximately 560 or so acres per average. So small acreage typically ends up being those that are billable farms typically falls under that space. Specifically, when you look at something in the agricultural space as it relates to agroecological support or agroforestry support, anything below 50 acres, for instance, becomes unviable. So when you look at the key needs, you're looking at 150 to 250 uh, acres of land to actually prosper from agroforestry.
Mm.
Mhm.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
To prosper from agroforestry economically.
Okay, I see. So you said below 50 acres, it's unviable. So do you mean it's unviable strictly in terms of agroforestry, or is it viable in other ways? What are those limits that those who have under 50 acres are dealing with?
So look at it from the perspective of what we look at investment strategies. Okay, it's not the fact that you can't have profitable land at 50 acres. That's not the case by any means. But when you're looking at how the land itself can be worked, specifically in the agroforestry space, you actually need more acreage footprint to be viable. So if you have
Mm.
a working land or working forest that's 50 acres, you're typically challenged with being able to get commercial support in that space.
Do you find that those who have relatively small holdings, do you find that they're able to readily recognize the value of that land? Do you have to do any work to help people understand the value of the land that is in their care?
I think it's probably best to look at it slightly different. So look at it from a structural insight perspective. Agroforestry typically is a 5 to 20 year planning horizon. Okay, so with that horizon being in place, in order to support such an horizon, you have to have certain things that are key. You have to have stable titles, for instance. You have to have capital companies. You have to be in a situation where there's a generational continuity that exists. Those things are part of the requirements in order to scale. So it's hard to scale, and 10 years instability exists as a result of that. So it's not necessarily the fact that just there's small acreage. There's a bigger challenge involved. The bigger challenge is basically how do you create an environment structurally that supports land ownership in this particular space across the board with all the key factors. And in our specific capability from TASFRL's perspective, we actually look at it slightly different than particularly some other organizations do. We don't focus on production and policy. We basically follow a two-track approach: production enablement and ownership stabilization. Those two together is what supports durable stewardship, and durable stewardship requires both.
What are some of the I don't know if the word's programs, what are some of the interventions that TASFRL is activating, operationalizing through your landowner support to help build those two things that you just named?
So we let's break each of those tracks down then based on the question. So the first
Great.
track, production enablement, is about bringing in regenerative, low impact farming, and also positioning the land steward to not only be able to participate, for instance, in an RCS related practices, but also have the option of doing conservation adoption. The second track, as I mentioned, is the issue of ownership stabilization. In the case of ownership stabilization, heirs property resolution is key. The second thing that's key is succession planning. And third in that same space is title clarity. With title clarity, you can now participate in getting access to farm numbers, so through farm service agencies. Okay. The loop around is that in order to participate in NRCS programs, you have to have a farm service agency account, number of signs. So it's a vicious circle if you look at it from the perspective of the things that have to be done. What we try to focus on, again, based on our approach, is making sure that the land stewards are aware of the requirements to get into the various programs and provide them access to commercially available tool sets, basically, to be able to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. So if a landowner, a land steward calls your team, sends an email, what's their process once they're on your radar?
I'm sorry, repeat that question again, please.
Once a landowner, they learned about TASFRL, they're seeking, okay, I have these heirs property challenges, our ownership isn't stable, or we would like to enable more production on the land that's in our care. Once they reach out to your organization, what are some of their first steps in working with you?
The first step in working with us is awareness, which you just said, they're reaching out to us. We've made it a point to make access to us as easy as possible. We obviously are on Facebook and we're on most of the social media platforms that exist as well. We're obviously on the SFLR Network website as well. And so those things, we're easily able to be reached via our office number, which is available again on the website. And more importantly, we'll be moving around throughout the state, doing various seminars and other things, working with people on the ground. Our whole focus is community as it relates, and
Mm,
that's the key element associated with it. So we make ourselves visible within the community of folks that we support.
great. And I really like that emphasis on community as well, because something I'm finding in working with just the different sites across the network is that for landowners being able to call up other landowners or have just being in relationship not only with partners, not only with our network sites, but with each other as a landowner, land steward community can really generate a lot of momentum, just a sharing of best practices. That collaborative energy is really a really remarkable thing to be a part of. So I'm excited to hear that community based model is so critical to the work that you all are doing. One of the things I appreciate so much about TASFRL, as even as we're building this new partnership and relationship through SFLR, is your tagline, inclusive roots and regenerative futures. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about what that means to you as the site director and to your organization?
If you think about it, the entire process we're talking about is not just a Texas issue; it's a global issue. And being that it's a global issue, we have to recognize that we have to include people from everywhere, from all different parts of life, ethnic groups, etc., in this process when it comes to how do we protect the land, how we protect the environment, how do we do things that benefit overall. So inclusive roots basically says exactly that. We include people from any background, any roots associated with our delivery and how we regenerative futures is basically the stabilization, but at the same time, there's sustainability associated with moving things forward into the future to ensure that we have the land available to us for generations to come.
Mm,
So take a tag on a little bit further into it, conservation is an effort that we all have to take seriously. But there are different meanings around the fact of how we apply and bring that conservation activities to the table.
Yeah.
Our focus is not to be restrictive on the approach of how conservation takes place, but to be supportive in the approach to ensure conservation takes place, whether it's in the forestry space or whether it's in the agricultural space in general. That's kind of where we are. So regenerative fruits, excuse me, regenerative futures. It ends up being that our focus is how do we make things happen? Okay, inclusive fruits, regenerative futures, bringing everybody in, making awareness for everyone involved in the process, and ensuring that from a land stewardship perspective, we recognize that in order for the land to be here, we have a role. We have to take that role and support that role.
Wonderful. Based on the conversations you're having with land stewards, families in Texas right now, how are the landowners in your community thinking about legacy today? What's top of mind for them?
There are challenges. There are challenges because if you look at it, no matter what size the land is or the tract of land is, there is an issue associated with how do we ensure that the connectivity amongst family and there's a synergy there that relates. In a lot of cases, especially where you have tracts that have long family legacies, there's identification of who actually are the heirs of that property. And in order to be able to move a program forward, you have to make sure that the team, i.e., the heirs of that property, are working together toward moving forward in that particular structure. I think folks understand that we do have land here. What does it mean to manage the land? Steward their land is a key element. But more importantly, how do we help them to make the connection on being land stewards and family members that potentially have different views of how the land should be managed?
Yeah. What advice would you give to a small acreage land steward who is sitting at that point of difficulty and challenge and concern as it relates to determining the future of the land that's in their care? What words of advice would you give to them?
You must first of all approach it from a community perspective. In other words, you have to get together and plan on what the actual future of your land is. There has to be some cohesiveness there.
Mm,
Without cohesiveness, then you're basically going to be fractured. If you're fractured, you can't move forward in a solid plan for development or managing the land or participation in the program or anything else.
yeah.
So the first thing is understand the requirements of developing a plan for the future and working together to achieve that plan.
Develop a plan and work together to achieve that plan. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what is at stake for rural communities when small acreage landowners aren't resourced with the support tools, connections they need? I'm often thinking about just the role that one, even on the street that I live on, I'm in rural middle Georgia, so not in Texas, but I think about the impact it has on the land that I'm on if and when my neighbor makes a choice or doesn't make a choice, and so on, all the way down the road. Like, we really are connected to one another physically in terms of our land stewardship. And so I'm wondering, as you think about, again, just what's at stake if we don't do the best we can to strengthen these connections, to support small acreage landowners, what's at stake for these rural communities in Texas and perhaps beyond?
I think the one thing that we all must keep in mind is that even though I may own a track next door to you, and my track is obviously identified different than yours, the land itself is connected. So, good, better, and different, whatever you do on your land will have some form of impact on what I'm doing on my land. So, we really need to stop looking at it as a my land track and I do whatever I do, it has no impact on you. It actually does. Depending on what you do in the water system affects the water that's on my land. Okay. Depending on what you do when it comes to whether or not you use certain type of herbicide, it potentially affects my land, and vice versa. So
Mhm.
we get it from a perspective that there is actually one Earth and one ecosystem, and manage it from that perspective. It helps to change things. It helps to change our view, but more importantly, we can think farther ahead as it relates to what those things are. Now we need to manage the future associated with what the land is able to do and whether or not it's actually able to rejuvenate itself.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. I often think one of our site directors and executive directors, Mr. Duran Lacey down in Alabama, he often talks about how, and I may have shared this on other lives before here on LinkedIn, but he often talks about how whenever there is work done on one landowner's land, bringing in any vendors to deliver any services on that land, that it's feeding an entire local economy. So you have that logger come into the neighborhood, they're grabbing coffee, they're grabbing lunch, they're tending to that landowner, and just how it's all supportive of one another, and how it really is just this communal collective effort. And so I definitely resonate with what you're sharing there, and I know that's a sentiment that's held across SFLR. Oh, go ahead.
I see someone put a comment on about loss of available water. It's interesting because one of the other things TASFRL is heavily involved in, we're part of an implementation team to look at how Prop 4, specifically here in Texas, which has to do with water reserve, is ultimately implemented. But let's talk about that for a moment. The aquifers that exist, there are only so many of them, and they're actually positioned to serve the entire area in which we're talking about. Specifically here in East Texas, there's one aquifer that services the entire area, even though they're connected to other aquifers that exist. The problem is that the aquifers do need time to regenerate themselves. So when you're looking at moving water or loss of water access or water rights and a host of other things, all those things have to be taken into consideration. In order for a agricultural practice to be successful, there's not one single one that does not require an access to water. So if you look at livestock, each element of livestock, each species of livestock requires a certain amount of water on a daily basis for consumption. If you look at crops, which require a certain amount of water, all those things come into play. And it's again, it goes back to our perspective. It's the element of supporting the land. But when I say support the land and the associated ecosystem, I'm also talking about the values and support that will be necessary for
Mm.
water access. It's an entire system. We can't separate out certain components, assuming that the other component's going to stand alone and do by itself.
Absolutely. I see another comment about clustering. Do you have any thoughts on what Dr. Washington has shared here about clustering? I'm guessing he means, I'm not totally sure, but I'm wondering if you have an insight of what he might be referring to there, Joseph.
Conversations around clustering, it would probably be helpful to get a little bit more insight. But basically, what it comes down to is that if you look at how do we support the neighboring process, right? Your land versus my land. Okay. Let's say, for instance, that you have a working forest on your land. I obviously have a working forest on my land, but the two tracts are below a certain amount of acreage. So foresters will do, for instance, a loggers to come in and do a cut for me. Okay, clustering that amount of working forest together or the amount of acreage together to determine how to get that cut done and the merchandising associated with it is key at that point. So it's easier to get a logger to come in when there's more acreage than less. So if the break, for instance, is 50 and I got 49 acres and you have 49 acres, okay, we now collectively have more than 50.
Mm, yep, absolutely. Great. And that really goes back to keeping understanding that whole ecosystem and keeping the stewardship plan intact for a collective ecosystem despite the ownership boundaries that may exist as it relates to the different tracks.
Absolutely.
We can open the floor up for a few questions. We have time if there are a few audience questions. Let's see. I know sometimes there can be a bit of a lag between when people drop a comment and then we receive it, but the floor is open for questions. While we wait for those to come through, Joseph, I'd love to hear. Oh, one's already here. That Desiree. I see. Okay. For landowners, this is a question for you, Joseph. For landowners who may only have 10 to 20 acres, where should they begin if they want to think more intentionally about their forest stewardship?
Are we talking specifically just forestry, as in working forest land? Or are we talking about a landowner who has, say, roughly 10 to 20 acres? That there's a slightly different approach depending on what it is that they're trying to accomplish. I
Let's say
mean,
both. Maybe, yeah, go ahead.
okay, so it's not to say, for instance, there's a school of thought at times that says that if you have below 50 acres, there's not viable enough timber there to do a cut. We have an example, for instance, one of the landowners in our area who had exactly 10 acres of land, but it was 10 acres of a natural working forest, and he was able to get a cut there because we have a logger that was willing to go and take a look at the actual timber. The difference is it's going to be on a case by case basis. You can't assume that just because you have a certain amount of acreage that it's automatically going to restrict or isolate you out of a given area.
Okay. And
As
so
far as is concerned, and as far as agriculture is concerned, agriculture itself, again, has to do with what it is that you're actually planting. It's how successful are you at this particular process, whether you're trying to run cattle or livestock, or whether you're actually doing some kind of crop. It's all about the production angle that you're taking.
yeah, so it all depends on, yeah, what you're ultimately wanting to do. So perhaps one place people should begin if they do have this 10 to 20 acres is to think about what do I want to do? What and see. Yeah.
And that goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that it cannot be fractured. You have to have an understanding of where it is you're ultimately trying to get to.
Mhm.
The plan is necessary. You have to have a structured plan to get there. And I see there's another question from a gentleman that talks about or the statement actually, managing forest lands that influence clean air and human health is important. I 1000% agree with you. We have to take into consideration that we have a role as land stewards to ensure that the land is regenerated and it's sustainable. And without doing that, we ultimately will have the impact later.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes. I've really appreciated hearing your insights, Joseph, both in terms of the community oriented nature of what you're describing and that need for that structure, that need for that plan. Oh, I see here Duran saying clustering is taking several small landowners whose properties are close to one another and contracting together to make the total acreage more attractive to potential vendors. Yes, thank you, Duran. Absolutely. Thank you for fleshing that out. I see. Okay, Joseph, another question for you. Are you seeing more or less interest from younger generations in managing forest land in Texas? What are you seeing?
This is, again, this goes back to our comments about succession planning, right? We see that there is an exposure that if we don't get the next generation interested in actually becoming land stewards, that there's going to be a bigger problem for us as it relates. Okay, so with that being said, we actually are actively engaged in bringing in the next generation of land stewards, whether it's beginning in new farmers and ranchers, or whether it's land stewards who have an existing interest in a given tract that exists today. We have members of the organization, for instance, who are part of that same generational segment. You have to find a way to attract them and let them see firsthand the values of what's going on. They're not as far outside of the spectrum of understanding as we tend to, some of the elders, myself included, tend to think at times. They want to do it in a different way. And they have to basically nurture that method in which they're trying to do it to ensure that things happen accordingly.
Yeah.
So that's direct.
Oh, I think I may have lost you there for a moment. Hopefully it reconnects. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, okay. Are you
Yeah, I'm
still
not sure what
there?
happened. Uh, Senator, can you hear me?
I can hear
Can you
you.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I did cut out for a moment there, but now we're back. I see a question here that says, what's your opinion about the carbon exchange programs and their viability?
So I'm actually part of another effort, part of a steering committee that's looking into carbon sequestration and the carbon exchange process. I think the same thing exists there, Mr. Funnell, as it relates to one, there has to be a structured process in place. There are a lot of different programs that are out there. Some programs require, actually, most programs require higher acreage land. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that carbon sequestration is a natural process that exists. And we have to figure out, one, how to continue to leverage it while we help to offset the carbon footprint that exists.
Hmm. Okay. I'm curious to know, Joseph, what gives you optimism about the future? I think the work of land stewardship is inherently optimistic because you're often literally sowing seeds and planting trees that you may never experience the benefit from in the long term sense. I think our work is inherently optimistic, I like to think, but I'd love to hear for you specifically what gives you optimism and hope about the future?
I smile because I have this conversation with my wife all the time about why we bought land in the first place. And we bought land in the first place because of the requirement or view of generational legacy for our family. I have 7 grandkids. And out of the 7 grandkids, I want them to be able to have access to our land. And more importantly, I'd like for their grandkids and their grandkids to also have access to our land. And that's our goal. And based on that being our goal and our plan, I'm extremely optimistic because there's work to be done. And getting that work or doing that work is easy. We just have to
Mhm.
be.
Beautiful, beautiful. Do you have any closing thoughts or words for us as we conclude this phase of our conversation today?
Sure. I'll start off by saying I think it's important to keep in mind you cannot scale regenerative systems with unstable land tenure, which goes back to the concept of heirs, property, and succession planning. Another aspect associated with it is when the land is stable, communities will invest. If communities invest, then conservation exists.
Mm.
And finally, I'd like to first of all say do something, and that is a lot of times we talk about partnerships in communities. We are where we are today as an organization, we being TASFRL, where we are today as an organization, because we've been able to successfully partner with different organizations and communities as they, not only just here in Texas, but around the U.S. and also outside of the U.S. Organizations, for instance, like NRCS, for instance, in Texas, is led by Christy Oakes. Okay, and particularly Floyd Knowles, which is one of the key members on her team that we work with and support all the time. We have FSA, okay, where we work with Joshua Coleman all the time. We have Texas Forest Services, we work with closely. We work closely with Texas Forestry Association. We work closely with these partners because these partners have an insight on some of the things that are going on in this space. And with that, it helps us to invest deeper into the community so we can bring that information back into the communities. Being part of the NRCS stacks, for instance, which is every member of the TASFRL board has an interest in NRCS stacks. Being a part of that process, the state technical action committees helps us to drive that direction and
Mhm.
help people understanding of what we're seeing on the ground. Okay. Having philanthropic partners, for instance, the Cynthia George Mitchell Foundation, being available to because they have a vested interest in the land going forward, the stewardship, etc. Those are the types of things that matter. And I mentioned earlier, float. Float, by the way, stands for the Funding Lab of Agroecological Technologies, which basically says that we're trying to figure out how to bring all types of technologies into agroecological space so that people can benefit from this. And it's a global approach. And I thank the communities, the community of landowners, the communities by which we serve, and quite honestly, the community, whether it's funders, or whether it's those folks that are providing that area of support.
Excellent. Absolutely. So much of this work is it's impossible without partnerships, without collaborators, without all sorts, federal partners, private partners, donors. It really is a collaborative effort. So thank you so much, Joseph, for your time. Thank you to those of you who have been able to attend and participate in this conversation. You can learn more at TASFRL.org. You can see it there, hopefully on Joseph's screen there. You can also learn more about SFLR Network at SFLRnetwork.org. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to connecting next time. Oh, Joseph?
One final comment, if I would. I also want to make sure I don't pass the opportunity to thank the other members of the SFLR network because quite honestly, that connection, there's a give and take process when it comes to how we'll share and learn from each other in this process. And I'm extremely appreciative of the fact of the time that the members of the network have taken already to help integrate Castor into the space. And
Oh,
also the US for supporting SFLR.
oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Joseph. And thanks again, everyone, for being here. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you then.